there is a business case for disability inclusion. The disability market as a consumer market globally is over $13 trillion.
Welcome to the DesignRush podcast. I'm your host, Kia Johnson. Today's guest is Tiffany Yu, author of the Anti-Ableist Manifesto and founder of Diversability, a disabled-run, disabled-led social enterprise building disability pride. She's also a USA paraclimbing athlete, LinkedIn top voice, and Forbes Accessibly 100 honoree. In episode 107, Tiffany shares why the $13 trillion disability market is a business driver, how companies like Walmart and Goldman Sachs are rethinking accessibility, and why AI can be the great equalizer when managed with a culture-first mindset. Listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watch on YouTube. Tiffany, Diversability has made a massive impact on advancing disability inclusion in workplaces. Can you share one of your proudest moments where you saw tangible change resulting from your work?
Ooh, that is such a good question. I guess I'll share two things that have made me really proud over the last 15 plus years that Diversability has been around. And the first is really supporting our community in what we call the shame to pride transformation. So part of that means we will have people join our community who may be newer on their disability journey. And as a result of being a part of the community and learning about what other people are working on, how they're advocating, how they're best showing up for themselves, these people who were longtime lurkers are now proud advocates and ready to share their stories. So that to me is part of my why of why I keep doing this work. And the second thing I'll say is that we have always made it a point to hire directly from the disability community. So Diversability's team has always been entirely disabled run and disabled led. And as a result of that, we get to serve as the job references or write letters of recommendations for our team members when they're ready to go off to their next chapter. And our team members have gone off to go get their dream jobs or their dream internships or win those scholarships. And I feel really proud of everyone who I call our Diversability team alum, the people who have joined our team, whether it's for a short period of time or multiple years, to go see them and cheer them on as they pursue their careers and aspirations.
Under your leadership, Diversability has reshaped how organizations actually view disability inclusion. So I'd love for you to share a story about a time when you worked with a business or a leader who had a major mindset shift because of your work.
So I will say I recently wrote a book called The Anti-Ableist Manifesto, How to Build a Disability Inclusive World. It launched in the US last fall and is launching in the UK in March. And part of why I bring that up is I wrote this book as a way to essentially scale our work. So you can bring Tiffany in or someone from Diversability in to come do a training, but sometimes that may be cost prohibitive. And so along our offer suite, now we have a book that kind of deep dives into everything that's needed to build not only disability inclusive workspaces and workplaces, but also disability inclusion on a broader level and what that might look like. And one of the unintended impacts, I guess, of it, which actually could be intended, is just knowing that the chapters are short, and at the end of every single chapter, there are reflection questions. And it's been so powerful to see people on LinkedIn that I've never met before reflecting on these questions, sending me messages telling me that they're sending emails off to their teams about how to rethink whether it's hiring processes or accessibility in their workplaces or even accommodation requests together. So they're taking action right away. And that's the best part of all of this.
Amazing. In terms of just advice that you would give to others looking to spark similar transformation, what would you say to that?
I would say there is a piece of art that is featured in the book. It's called the Anti-Ableist Manifesto, and it has about 30 statements on it. And each of these statements actually refer to chapters in the book. And so now when people ask, what is one thing I can do or how can I get started, I now hope to show them this manifesto art and hope that there's at least one or a couple statements on here that will be your entrance into this work. So some of the statements include disability is intersectional, be curious but respect boundaries. But I also have a 5-minute TED Talk available if you don't want to read a book or listen to the 8.5 hour audiobook called How to Help Employees with Disabilities Thrive. And in that 5-minute TED Talk, I highlight 3 ways that companies can implement immediately. And the first one is to stop making assumptions. Stop making assumptions about what other people assume we can or can't do. The second one is rethinking accommodations. Accommodations simply are a type of inclusive design that enable us to complete our work task. We just may do it in a way that's different from our peers. And the third is to embrace flexibility. We may have different styles of working or work at different hours. But again, as long as we're showing up and getting our work done in terms of what was expected with us, that can really help enable us to work in the environments that we will thrive in.
I want to bring our attention to the fact that, many organizations, they claim to prioritize diversity, but disability inclusion often gets overlooked. What do you think are the main barriers actually preventing businesses from fully embracing disability advocacy? You were touching on a couple of them, but I think if you could expand more, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the past couple of years, what's been really fascinating is now we do have data available that highlights that there is a business case for disability inclusion. So there's an Accenture report from 2023 that says that businesses that champion disability employment and disability inclusion actually are more profitable. At the same time, there's other research that has been done that shows that if you include our family and friends, the disability market as a consumer market globally is over $13 trillion. And so I keep coming back to the research, and I think that for a long period of time, disability inclusion was viewed through a moral lens and not necessarily an economic lens. And now we have that data available that really highlights, hey, we are some of the most innovative, creative leaders out there, adaptive leaders out there. In addition to that, I just had the opportunity to meet Sir Richard Branson, and he's been very open about dyslexic thinking and living with dyslexia. Yes. And one of the things he has highlighted is the transferable skills that have made him a successful business leader, including problem solving, creativity, and leadership skills, because he's forced to focus more on his communication skills as someone with dyslexia. And I think being able to highlight more business leaders like that, and I call them possibility models, disabled possibility models, who are showing us that in all of these different industries, it is possible for you, even for me, to become an investment banker, to become a recruiter, to be a TV news producer. And those are all roles that I've held as someone who has both a parent, one of my arms is paralyzed, and non-apparent disability. So yeah, I think that having more of those stories out there and more of this data out, and being able to come on podcasts like this and share this data with your audience, it's going to start to make the shift.
That's so true. It's a mindset shift, and it's about educating, and just increasing that awareness. I feel sometimes that, we tend to sort of view things in life as just this lens of fear. And I think a lot of people are, living in the state of fear because of the unknown, and even leaders in organizations, thinking, how am I going to approach this? What am I going to do? Especially when they find themselves kind of like, facing it, it's full frontal, it's here. How do they deal with it? And how do they then become more inclusive? And I think it's a barrier. It's not just a barrier, an organizational barrier. It's just a mind barrier that you put inside yourself as well. So it's a case of, I guess, from what I can gather from what you're saying, it's unlearning a lot of these things to relearn and integrate and understand that there is so much more access and inclusivity that needs to be merged into organizations.
That's such a great point. And I will highlight, again, there is research out there that interviewed hiring managers as to why they weren't prioritizing disability inclusion or why didn't they hire that disabled candidate. And the top 3 answers were that the hiring manager weren't sure what the disabled person could or couldn't do. And this was different types of disabilities. They weren't sure if the person who had a learning disability, what they could or couldn't do, or physical disability. And again, that comes back to what you said, the unlearning, but also really taking that moment to say, what assumptions am I making about this person's experience? If they thought that they could do the job, that's the reason why they applied. So hopefully you can give them a chance so that they can show you what they can do. I think what I'll also highlight as well is that one thing I talk about in my work and in the book is about how we can build an accessibility first culture. And what I mean by that is that I can come into a space as someone who has a paralyzed arm and not have to worry about the friction of different experiences or products or my work being inaccessible to me. Part of what I think the fear is really is, and again, there's research around this, so I like to both marry the research with the stories, is that people think that the majority of accommodations are high tech or really difficult to implement, when research has shown that the majority of them, I believe 56% was the last time I looked, 56% of accommodations cost $0. That could be changing your start time or giving someone breaks, to go to a doctor's appointment or take medication. That could be providing someone with written notes instead of verbal communication after a meeting. That could be turning on the captions in a Zoom meeting or whatever your video messaging platform is, so that someone who is deaf or hard of hearing or could benefit from captions, maybe English is their second language, or they're more of a visual, they digest information more visually and see the captions, right? Those are all examples. And even for someone like me, I wrote the entire first draft of my book using speech-to-text technology. I use a tool called otter.ai. It's free. It not only records the audio, but a rough transcript so that I can go back. I can talk my thoughts out loud rather than having to type large amounts of texts, and then go back and refine it and edit it so that then, you have the book that is in front of you.
And I mean, the book itself, it must have been such a process for you, right? When did you decide this is what I need to do? This is where I need to go. I need to put these thoughts down. I need to put down what I've learned. I need to share it with everyone. When did you have that moment? Yeah.
Such a good question. I will say that my journey into publishing was not conventional. There is an 18-year-old or a 17 or 18-year-old version of Tiffany who had always dreamed of writing a book. But I will say that 17-year-old Tiffany did not envision that this is the book that she would write. And honestly, even if I look back, as someone who acquired my disability at a young age, at that time, I did not think that I'd become a disability advocate. So fast forward to 2022 timeframe, I ended up receiving a message from a literary agent and a publisher who were interested in more of my thoughts on disability inclusion through a more corporate lens. I'm someone who, again, I've worked in investment banking at Goldman Sachs. I was a recruiter there. I've also worked at Bloomberg and got to co-found and pitch the creation of their disability employee resource group over 10 years ago. And so part of me was thinking, how can I marry everything that I have learned over the past 15 years of being a disability advocate and the past almost 30 years of living in this disabled body? And when I look back and I think about it, we are currently living through some unprecedented times where diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility may be seen as threatened. I don't see, again, doing well or investing in disability inclusion as mutually exclusive. Again, there's research out there. And at the same time, I guess I'm so grateful that I can leave this book out in the world, that if there are people who may never meet me in person or happen to find my work somewhere, now there's a way that they can engage more deeply and bring this back to their workspaces.
There's a lot happening in the DEI arena, and we have seen, companies, Deloitte, Meta, and a couple of others actually scale back on their DEI efforts, mainly because of political pressures and shifting priorities. And then you've got companies like Uri Ventures, Deutsche Bank, and Costco that are doubling down and they're seeing it as a long-term win. So I would love to find out from you why you think some are backing off while others are like leaning in even more.
Ultimately, I think it comes down to power. And I will say I am proud that some of my former employees, some of my former employers have supported the push for DEIA and are going out with their leadership saying, this is good for our business, right? And again, if I look at this through an economic imperative, businesses do better when you have a diversity of people and thoughts, because they're bringing, again, creativity, problem solving, innovation along with them. So why I think certain companies are pulling back could be, like you said, political pressure. It could be pressure from their shareholders. But I will say I feel hopeful that it will all sort itself out. I think right now it can be easy to feel despair, and a lot of despair leads to inaction. And so I'm choosing to lean into hope, choosing to lean into the allies and champions who continue to push for this work. And these are not small companies. You know, you named Costco, there's Goldman Sachs, there's JP Morgan. There are some really great companies who are holding firm. And part of it could be that they are in a position of power and privilege to be able to do so. And one of the things I talk about in my work and in my book is how can you use your power and privilege to fight for more justice, to fight for more equity. And we are seeing it play out loud in front of us, that the companies that I do feel like feel like they may have some power and privilege are really doubling down on their commitment to these efforts.
So if you were to look at this then, more in the long term, what do you think the impact will be for businesses that are actually deprioritizing disability inclusion?
There is a quote that gives me hope, and it is from someone named Dr. Robert Bullard, and he mainly works in the climate justice space, environmental justice. But the quote he uses, the quote he says is, "The fight for justice is a marathon relay." So the part of why I bring that up is I have been doing some version of this work for over 15 years. I feel tired at times. I feel defeated and deflated and exhausted at times. But I also know that as of right now, I'm holding the baton in this marathon relay, and there will be a period of time where I will pass it on to the next generation. And part of why I bring that up is, again, I really agree with him that whether you replace justice with DEIA or whatever it is that you care about, that fight will be a marathon relay. Right now, maybe we are in a period where it's retreat and uncertainty and political pressure. And perhaps when that baton is handed off to the next generation or whoever's next in the relay, there will be, like I said before, a course correction, maybe a change in leadership. Maybe we are out of a crisis, out of feeling like we're in a crisis stage, and move into a different part of how we're running our businesses. Because I also keep in mind, I guess one last thing I'll say is that jobs like being a content creator or a social media manager didn't really exist 15 years ago, right? And I mean, even with AI coming, there will be new jobs created that currently don't exist, that will exist very much going forward, that we may not even know about.
Tiffany, I actually spoke with former Microsoft GM of Learning and Development, Abhijit Baduri, on the DesignRush podcast. So he mentioned that companies need to reflect their customer base internally, or they actually risk missing out on big opportunities. And, the World Health Organization stats actually reflect that over 1.3 billion people worldwide are living with disabilities. So how do you think businesses can rethink their hiring and their leadership strategies to be more inclusive, would you say?
Yeah, there are a couple different parts to unpack in there, but I think with the hiring processes, even just naming that if you are a disabled candidate and you think that you can do the job well, please apply. At the same time, I think being able to see see people who look like you within the organization makes you feel, and this is why I think that the power of disability employee resource groups or disability affinity groups at some of these large companies are really powerful. And that's why we ended up building Diversability. Was I came off of this summer internship at Goldman Sachs and got to meet the leadership of their disability employee resource group and said, this was so powerful within this company that now I have sponsors and mentors throughout the bank. Where does this exist outside for people who aren't part of these organizations? But I think it's also looking at what we're including in job descriptions that may be unintentionally excluding people with disabilities. One example could be, and this one's very specific to me, but oftentimes you'll see in a job description, must have a driver's license. What must have a driver's license could mean is must be able to transport between client meetings, right? Now with rideshare or taxis, you don't have to have a driver's license to go from one place to another, or you could even take public transit, right? So does the job really require you to have a driver's license, or do you just need to be able to transport yourself from point A to point B? That's an example. One other that is often seen in job listings is must be able to lift 25 pounds. I'm someone, my arm is paralyzed. Being able to lift 25 pounds for an office job is not usually required, but again, is what you really mean must be able to transport 25 pounds. Maybe you need to transport some books somewhere, right? I can use a cart or a carry-on luggage, or I could ask someone else. And so again, part of it is really looking at each responsibility on a job listing and saying, is this job listing, is what we're trying to say here really getting at the core of what we're asking people to do? On a much broader level, I think exactly like you were mentioning in that interview that you had, you want who is within your company to reflect who your consumer base is, right? Because there's something called the curb cut effect. And what the curb cut effect essentially is a bunch of wheelchair users who were students, as an act of defiance, cut into a curb so that they could get their wheelchairs onto the sidewalk. This is in the San Francisco Bay Area. As a result of doing that, this radical act, this act of defiance, they actually found that now being able to transport seamlessly off of the road onto the sidewalk was helpful for parents with strollers, for package delivery people, for people like me with my carry-on luggage with wheels. And so you have this unintended impact again, where when you design something with disability in mind, or design, whether it's at the margins or whoever might be your case, I always like to encourage people to have a one-hand test on all of the products they're designing. You actually open up that product for a lot of other markets instead. That includes audiobooks, which were originally designed for blind people, and not everyone, a lot of people choose to read books via audiobook. Electric toothbrushes were originally designed for the disability community. So a lot of products that we use on a daily basis, many of which were initially designed for the disability community, but that all of us are benefiting from. So even thinking about that as we design different products and experiences to say, hey, have we thought about how people who have different types of disabilities will engage with this product or experience? And can we design it from the get-go, whether it's a restaurant or a concert or even physical products, as I was mentioning before, so that we are opening up this product to the greatest market possible.
And I was just about to say, you're opening yourself up to so many more economic opportunities if you were to look at it from an economic business perspective, So it just makes sense. Yeah. Very interesting about the toothbrush. I hadn't known it was actually designed for those who are disabled. That is like Like, how long ago was this? This is so crazy.
I did do research on some of these for the book. There's a chapter in the book talking about inclusive design benefits everyone. And I go into even the jacuzzi. Yes. So you'll learn about all of these. Well, the jacuzzi, for someone who might have arthritis or, experience body aches or pains, that will benefit them as well. The first iteration of the keyboard for the typewriter was also designed with disability in mind as well. So actually, and it could be a fun exercise because I think often when we think about designs for the disability community, the first things we think of are a ramp or an elevator or the push buttons on an automatic door. But there are so many other products out there that were initially the inspiration for that innovation came from the disability community, which again comes back to disability is so often the root of innovation, right? If you want to be, you asked that question during the quickfire about like which industry is I guess moving the quickest on inclusion. And I turn to tech because in a lot of ways, tech can become the great equalizer. I can now write a book as someone who has an upper extremity disability and only types with one hand. I can now use the power of my voice thanks to technology. For people who are dyslexic, as we've talked about earlier, you can now use AI tools to help you draft an email or to double check how to how to digest a lot of information in a simpler way. So, or the ways, I ask Siri on my phone a lot about what the weather is or what time it is, or just set a timer. And that's a hands-free way that we are getting information, right? So we can also think about who are people who don't have access, who may not have that level of dexterity to type everything out or even look. For someone who's blind, you can have Siri tell you what time it is. So yeah, I think that tech enhances accessibility and has an opportunity to create more opportunity within the disability community.
I want to find out from you, what are the most common mistakes that companies make when attempting to integrate disability inclusion into their DEI strategies, would you say?
The most common mistake is thinking that there is a one-size-fits-all with regard to accommodations or how we might access a space. And I guess I'll share one story of something that worked very well for me. Is when I started at Goldman Sachs, every single new hire had an opportunity to get an ergonomic assessment done of our workstation. So all of us getting an ergonomic workstation, none of us were special, and everyone received not everyone, but you could choose, a lot of us got a keyboard wrist pad for our keyboard. I ended up getting a left-handed mouse because I use the mouse with my left hand. Some of us got a second screen, so we have two monitors. I also, because I'm petite, I got a footstool so that my legs weren't dangling off the chair. And while I was there, and I know you're laughing, but these are all things that help us do our work. But I think even with highlighting the step stool is that was not connected to my disability, but the ergonomic specialist was able to see, oh, the way you're sitting in your chair is like this. And then the ergonomic specialist asked if I would benefit from a headset where I could use speech-to-text technology or talk-to-text. And honestly, at that particular point in time, I hadn't heard of that. But what I appreciated just in that example was how many different solutions were provided for me so that I could do my best work, right? And so just because a person is deaf, they may not benefit from having a sign language interpreter. There are many deaf people who don't sign, right? And so that person may benefit from having a cart captioner who is captioning in real time or having a better transcription device. And so, again, I guess coming back to the misconception and the solution is co-creating with whoever needs the access and trying out different things and checking in to see how they're working or not. And I guess I'll come back and say that, again, accommodations are only there to help you do your job. They're not special treatment. They're just saying, hey, you might you might do this job a little bit differently. You're still getting the report at whatever time you need to. Just the way I did it may be a little bit different from how you do it. So I think that the other misconception is thinking that disability inclusion is only the role of your DEI team, which may or may not exist. When we think about accessibility, it is embedded into every single part. Think about when you go into an office and you take the elevator. That's accessibility in action, right? And so I also do want to make a distinction that disability inclusion to me is about humans, and accessibility is about the practices and policies that we're putting in place so that the humans can be included. But accessibility is everywhere. I mean, even the fact that we have an internet connection to do this, to record this, is making it so that I can show up for this interview and this is actually where I've done most of my podcasts, in the place where I do my podcasts, right? And I've set it up so that I have my best workstation that's best for me, so I can have water on the side, and I bring that up because accessibility is embedded into everything that we do, and it's not just relegated to one department of a company. This is why, again, I guess I come back to that idea of building an accessibility first culture. Even through a design perspective, through reaching customers, when you embed accessibility into everything that you're doing, you will remove that friction from people participating or wanting to show up at your organization, and then that will translate into the products that you're designing for your customers as well.
So the example that you were just using now, about trying all these different ways at the previous job that you were at, would you then say that that's actually a way that leaders can create like authentic, sustainable change? Is just like, I guess listening to those who are there, who are present within your organization, listening to, your clients out there and making sure that you're being inclusive in that way as well, and just trying out different things, as per what you were just mentioning.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because what it's bringing up for me is that, again, like we said, there's no one size fits all. But if you are getting feedback from your customers and from your employees, I also take that as a win sometimes, is that people feel a level of psychological safety to tell you what access barriers they may be encountering. And at the same time, in addition to trying out different things, one thing you can do is by leading with access first. And so what I mean by that is doing access checks. So if you're hosting an event, making sure that on the event page, there is an email address available that you can reach out to if you have accessibility requests, or even as you're RSVPing in there. And then even if you're having a meeting, even opening by saying, hey, we just want to do an access check to make sure that everyone's access needs are being met. And I will say I've had an opportunity to join a couple of other meetings that have been happening. And on one of the meetings I joined, there was someone who was in attendance who was blind and said that she would benefit from actually not having people insert into the chat while people were speaking, because then it would read the chat out to her, right? And so by leading by saying, hey, here's the access that I would benefit from so that I can participate fully in this meeting, then we can all kind of adjust meeting norms in a way that works best for everyone.
Tiffany, Abhijit that I spoke about earlier, he also pointed out that many companies struggle with change management because they don't communicate why a shift is happening or how it impacts employees. Now, when it comes to disability inclusion, how should companies communicate the efforts so that they actually resonate with their workforce, would you say?
Ooh, there is another research report that came out with Accenture about the fact that about 4 out of 5 disabled employees aren't feeling a level of psychological safety in their workspaces to be transparent about their disabilities at work, right? So the communication needs to be followed by action. And I think that once you say something but you haven't implemented it, you start to lose trust. I think what I'll also say too is I think there needs to be grace all around, that we are trying to figure out how to make our spaces more inclusive for the people who are participating or engaging with us. And having a little bit of grace to make mistakes and learn out loud makes it so that leadership can better communicate and, again, keep that line of communication open so that employees can feel comfortable not only being transparent about their disabilities at work if they want to be, but also being able to know that if they share feedback, there's not going to be negative ramifications or retaliatory actions taken around it, right? And that's a difficult balance. You know, it's interesting that I look back at my career and started one of these disability employee resource groups over 10 years ago, and I'm still having conversations with corporate clients about them just getting started with the creation of their disability employee resource groups. So all of that to say, I do notice there is a cultural shift around disability. My generation is much different than my parents' generation around the number of people who are more open about their disabilities. We're seeing more what we call self-ID rates go up because we're actively removing the stigma around disability. There's still a lot of work to be done, but things are much different than when I became disabled at 9 years old or when I first started building disability community back in 2009.
Beyond hiring more people with disabilities, what would you say are some tangible, measurable ways that companies can track whether they're truly making an impact?
I mean, I think part of my interest right now is how can we not just get disabled people jobs, but help them build their careers? And what I mean by that is we spent a lot of time with hiring, which is the point of entry, right? But what systems do we have in place that are supporting that disabled person, not only from them getting hired, but actually building a career and stepping into leadership? We spend so much time, or we previously had spent so much time on entry-level jobs, which is fine. There are still many disabled people who need those jobs, but I want to see more conversation around disability leadership. Even to look at someone like Sir Richard Branson, who is such a successful business person who has a disability, committing to disability inclusion, hopefully will create more waves within different companies to want to invest in disability mentoring programs. And there are a couple disability mentoring programs. One is I think it's called Generation Valuable. It's this initiative through the Valuable 500. And the Valuable 500 is doing some really great work around getting company leadership to commit to disability inclusion. And we at Diversability are a proud part of their business directory. So if there are, and I've had an opportunity to speak to one of the cohorts of Generation Valuable, which are current employees at one of these partner companies who are looking for mentorship or looking for sponsorship and mentorship in order to build their careers.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so now you're kind of like touching on this right now. So then I think I'm going to be picking your brain a bit more because I'd love for you to walk us through a specific success story where a company effectively integrated disability inclusion practices. And then also if you can share the strategies and steps that made the biggest difference, that would be superb.
Ooh, you know, I will say transparently, I feel like many companies will have more work to do, but I will share just a small case study that I also included in the book from Walmart. And in full disclosure, the Walmart Foundation has supported Diversability's work with some sponsorship dollars. But one of the things that they've done is I believe they have something called like an Accessibility Council. And with all of the different disability nonprofits that they support, they'll bring us on to chat about different initiatives that they might be thinking about. And one of the things that they ended up piloting was having sensory hours implemented within their stores. So what this means is how can we dim the lights a little bit and have, instead of moving images on the screen, have static images, and instead of music playing around, turn off the music. And they ended up doing a pilot program with feedback from the disability community in a couple of their stores. And then I believe a little over a year ago, they ended up announcing that they have now rolled out sensory-friendly hours in all of their stores. So that is, yeah, and that's an example. And I think they also they have a couple initiatives, but that one was really powerful because it was, okay, we know people want to shop here, but they're experiencing friction because there's too much stimulus happening. And so can we pilot it in a couple of stores first, see what the feedback is directly from the community, and hey, this is working. Doesn't really change much. It just says, hey, during these couple of hours, and there are even people who don't have disabilities who prefer to shop in that type of environment. And so again, this was the curb cut effect in action, where again, it was, okay, we're implementing this, and there are other people who benefit from it as well. So that's an example where that's an example of something that got implemented through a small experiment. And that's the part, like you said, it's about the listening and trying out things, receiving feedback. If it's not working, okay, try out something else.
So in terms of our next question, Tiffany, for executives that are focused on measuring success, what are the top metrics they should track to gauge the impact of disability inclusion, would you say?
I will acknowledge that there is a disability data gap. And your data is only as good as your questions. So I will say, at a baseline level, just better understanding what the self-ID rates are within your organization. I think the last time I checked, that number was around 3.2%. If we assume that 1 in 5 or 1 in 4, at least here in the US, 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, we're having a very large underrepresentation of people identifying as disabled. But I think that number is changing. And I remember even in some of the organizations that I've had the chance to work with, they will share with me that their self-ID numbers have been doubling year over year, or at least just getting better percentage-wise to closer to what they actually think it's going to be. And then I would maybe look at who is in percentage of disabled employees that are in contract positions versus full-time. But honestly, this is just me thinking out loud. I haven't dug into the disability data. And I will say that the Valuable 500 did come out with a report on things that workplaces need to do in order to close that disability data gap.
What steps should agencies take to stand up as strategic partners for businesses that are looking to prioritize disability inclusion?
Here in the US, we have certification programs that will say if you are a minority-owned business or a woman-owned business or a disability-owned business. One of the things I do think about a lot in terms of even my own work is that as someone who runs a disability-led company, I really want to create more opportunity for women, for people of color, for disabled people. And so even as I think about contractors, I'm creating more opportunities so that we can all share. So advice for agencies, I would say lean into what you think your strengths are. I mean, you even asked me a few questions during this interview that I'm not the best person, right? And so it's also just knowing what you are good at. And if you're not good at something, don't try to pretend that you will be. This is where partnership and collaboration comes into play. And I'm a big believer in collaboration over competition. And so bringing in different partner organizations that you can work with. So say, for example, you're an agency that's gotten hired and maybe your specialty is in women or racial diversity, and you want to look at it through an intersectional lens. There are so many, not so many, you could bring in an agency who has expertise around disability to help round out the thought process on whatever the project is.
So would you say there are specific services or frameworks that agencies should offer to demonstrate expertise in the space? I mean, you're kind of touching on something right now. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
I guess I will say, and this is an online search I would recommend people to do, but there has been a post or maybe an article going around saying, here's how to know whether your disability consultant actually knows what they're talking about. And some examples could be that they understand person first and identity first language, and that disability isn't a bad word. Person first language is person with disabilities versus identity first, which is disabled person. Better understanding what the social model of disability is, which says that disability itself is not the problem. It's the inaccessibility or external environment that needs to be fixed. And there's a whole list. I would encourage people to take a look. Take a look at, and then also just remember that the experts on disability are disabled people, but not every disabled person is an expert on themselves and their experience. And again, this is why I think it's just important to bring in a breadth of perspectives or bring in someone who has access to what I call a choir of voices to help shape what's going to be the best, most disability inclusive experience.
So as an agency, how would you say I would then need to stay updated on evolving disability inclusion based practices?
As someone, it depends on where you sit within the disability ecosystem. So we spent a lot of time talking about businesses. So if you are someone who is passionate about disability inclusion in business, I would say following a couple LinkedIn pages. Disabled by Society is a really good one. They're based in the UK. The Valuable 500. Sinead Burke runs a company called Tilted Lens, Global Disability Inclusion. Deborah Raw runs, I think she runs Raw Impact and 1 Billion Strong. And those are all just different. Making Space is another one. Killy Cat Wells, also UK-based, does a lot around disability inclusion in business. So that's on the business side, right? If you want to be updated on advocacy issues, there's a whole nother group of organizations that I can recommend, like the American Association of People with Disabilities. There's an organization here called New Disabled South. And those are more grassroots advocacy, figuring out what's going on from a policy perspective. But hopefully that's a good start. And, one thing I do include in the book is if you are curious, you can even just do an online search that is maybe like disability inclusion resources for agencies and see what resources might show up. Go check out their pages to see if they're active. Because yeah, depending on who you are, and this is what makes this work fun and also could be seen as overwhelming for some people, is that there are a plethora of resources. So, I will have podcast friends who are curious about making their podcast more specific. The things that I tell them to do or follow would be different from hiring or different from an agency process.
From a brand's perspective, what would you say are the green and the red flags to watch for when selecting an agency partner to support disability inclusion initiatives?
I mean, I will say that we talk within the community. It's a big community, but it's a small community at the same time. And I'm in a couple groups where if an opportunity comes up, we may bring it up with each other to say, hey, has anyone worked with this agency before? What has your experience been? Do you feel like you were tokenized? Does it feel like it was performative? Or do you feel like you had a lot of creative control over what you were working on? So I know that's more of a short answer than distilling things down to red and green flags. But I think similar to you, I think reputation management is important. I will also say there's so much networking being done on platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram, depending on which platform you prefer. But I've created business relationships with people who have engaged with my content on LinkedIn for a period of time. And, I'm in the process right now of planning my UK book launch because it's coming out in March. And as part of it, I'm doing a lot of outreach to UK partners, some of whom I actually didn't know were watching my work. But I go to their pages and I see that they're following me or they've been following me since 2022. And so part of that to me is a little bit of a green flag to say, you are familiar with who I am and my work and my voice. So this kind of makes some sense for us to be able to partner together.
What would you say are the questions that you yourself would be asking these agencies to ensure alignment on inclusion goals?
I don't know if I'm necessarily going out and interviewing someone per se, because what's interesting is you can have the best answers, but it's really in your long-term actions. And so again, because I can ask you questions and you can give me very, very well presented answers. And then we end up working together and it's not that, right? So I guess I really appreciate the value of what I call like social capital. So having other people vouch for you and your work, or having case studies that are out there. But yeah, I will say there is someone I follow on LinkedIn who might be a good person who maybe has come up with some questions to ask. Her name is Kelsey Lindell, and she does a lot of work working with like creative agencies to make them think more about disability justice. But again, I kind of come back to the things that maybe aren't said. Again, I'm looking at the actions. I'm looking at how you've committed to the space. If you've worked with other disability brands before, what that experience has been. And again, we're all talking internally as well. And then in addition to that, I think it's also just understanding the value and worth that this disabled partner is bringing onto whatever project you're working on. And putting real dollars behind that and real value behind that on whatever the project is, and making that person, we talk about hiring a disabled consultant a lot, but what makes it even more meaningful is when you hire a disabled person, right? A consultant comes in to work on a one-off project. They come in, they provide advisory services, and then they're out, and it's up to that organization to decide whether they want to implement it or not. If you are part of the fabric of that organization's culture, you are an employee there, you have a voice, you have power. There could potentially be a little bit more power and say that you have in order to really make a difference within those organizations.
Who in the industry do you believe is doing exceptional work in disability inclusion right now? And why would you recommend leaders follow or collaborate with them?
That's a good question. I mean, I will say Amy Purdy she's a Paralympian. She was on Dancing with the Stars. She's also written a book. Recently just announced she's working on her next book. Is someone within the disability community that I just admire a lot. She's built a really strong personal brand. As you mentioned, like each of us as people are brands. But again, I think it depends. I think Keely Cat Wells, who's the founder of Making Space, the founder of C Talent, which ended up getting bought by Whaler, has been doing a lot of work around closing the disability employment gap through upskilling or providing people with paid opportunities. Sophie Morgan is a TV presenter in the UK who is doing a lot of advocacy work around making sure that the experience that disabled people have around air travel isn't as dehumanizing and disrespectful as it has been. There are so many. Lachi runs a nonprofit or started a nonprofit called Ramped, which previously has provided accessibility for the Grammys over the last couple of years. And if you go and look at the different interviews, you'll see, some musician getting interviewed and they have an ASL interpreter right by them. And the list can go on. And again, I think a lot of what I named are people who are moving and shaking in the specific industries that they're in. But what I would encourage people to do, you could even, if LinkedIn is your platform, you could do a search of LinkedIn Top Voices Disability, and you'll get a list of 15 or 20 people who are posting about disability advocacy and in their different realms, and providing really thought-provoking ways that you can show up better for the disability community. Jamie Shields is another, has been posting a lot. Shani Danda, who wrote the foreword for the UK version of my book, is also pretty active on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, the list can go on and on and on. But I think a big part of it, again, is following a choir of disabled voices, of people who have different disabilities maybe different demographics as well, like different genders, different sexual orientation, different races, so that you can better understand disability through the lens of intersectionality and through the lens of people who might have more apparent disabilities or people who have non-apparent disabilities and the ways they show up in the workplace as well.
Out of these people that you've just mentioned to me, what would you say makes the approach actually stand out?
I will say that, and I didn't even name these two people, but there are two people I follow on LinkedIn who, or actually three people who just provide really thought-provoking posts. And one is Julie Harris, one is Katarina Rivera, and one is Becca Lori Hector. And so my LinkedIn content is all about storytelling. I'm digging into different professional experiences that I've had. There are other types of people who are posting on LinkedIn who are sharing something provocative, or maybe they'll share one key stat and go and dig into it. So maybe they'll share, hey, do you know that the majority of accommodations cost $0? Like, accommodations aren't a burden, disabled people aren't a burden, and those types of posts that get shared very widely. So again, I think just figure out whose voice kind of resonates with you. And I also named some company pages as well that you can follow to just stay up to date as to what's going on.
Are there any specific projects or initiatives that you've led that you think others could learn from?
I will say, in the process of writing this book, not only was there the accessibility component of being able to leverage like accessibility for the win of using speech-to-text technology to write the first draft, but also I hired a disabled editor to help me with the developmental edits and incorporating people's stories. I compensated, or I provided a small stipend to people who shared their stories with me to be included in the book. I hired a disabled designer to put together the manifesto art. We hosted our Los Angeles book event at a disability-owned bookstore. If we have corporate orders come in, we'll direct those to disability-owned bookstores as well. And so even in just that small example of putting this book together, I tried to be really intentional around making sure that if I had an opportunity to support the disability ecosystem and hire disabled people, I did it.
I want to find out from you, Tiffany, what critical conversations should business leaders and decision makers be having right now to accelerate disability inclusion across industries?
I would say start with the question that is inspired by Senator Tom Harkin, which is, how can you double your disability hiring this year? What steps do you need to take in order to close the disability employment gap? This year here in the U.S. marks the 35th year of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I believe the 15th year of the Equality Act 2010 in the UK. So these are milestone years for companies to really look at where they can actively be creating more equity. The way I think about it on a baseline level is, how can we support a disabled person's livelihood? So even if we're not in a position to hire someone full-time, do we have part-time or contractor or consultant positions where we can bring someone in? Can we be more intentional about how we think about our paid internships or apprenticeship programs, so that we can bring more people in? But I do think we need to, like you said, really accelerate the actions that we're taking around how we can have more of us have gainful employment and livelihood, so that we can thrive in this current society.
So then, speaking to that, if you could sit down with anyone to discuss this further, who would it be? And what would you hope to achieve from the discussion?
My mind went to two places, which is, I'm happy to speak to the leadership of any country and any company about how, someone had asked me recently, is disability inclusion more top-down or is it bottom-up? And I said, it's all around, but it is very helpful when it is led by the top-down. And I even look at my own professional experiences of when I was working, the investment bank that I worked at, the president and CEO at the time both had disabilities and to see top leadership being transparent about living with their illnesses or disabilities made me feel safe that this was a place that viewed the skills that came with living with a disability as an asset.
As AI continues to reshape the workplace, we were speaking about this earlier. What would you say is the role that you see AI playing in advancing or potentially hindering disability inclusion efforts?
I see AI as an opportunity to enhance what you already have. Again, similar to other forms of tech, it is creating more accessibility. And I think, and again, there's another research report that came out a couple years ago about, I guess, how we can think about AI and the bias that it might have around disability and just being more aware. So I think AI is not going anywhere. It's trying to figure out how can we integrate it into what we're already doing and enhance who we already are, right? So, and again, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, there are jobs that exist now that didn't exist 15 years ago. I think with AI coming in, there is that fear that it will take away some jobs. It may, but at the same time, hopefully we will continue to up-level and gain more skills for an entirely new economy of jobs that don't even exist yet.
Definitely. So Tiffany, in terms of just your final words, do you have any advice or any words that you want to part with us? And then I'd love for you just to build on that and then also just let us know where we can get a hold of your book as well.
Sure. I will say that if you feel like you are newer to disability inclusion, we talked a lot about how to get started throughout this conversation. The Anti-Ableist Manifesto is a really great primer for you on how to get started. The best place you can get it is at whatever your favorite retailer is. It is available globally. But if you'd like to follow me, if you want to learn more about the book, you can go to tiffanyyu.com/book. And you'll see all the links there where you can get the book in audio, hardcover, paperback, and an ebook. But in terms of last thoughts, I think I just remind people that none of this work happens in silos. We're all trying to make our imprint on this work together. And I'll come back to just feeling really grateful to be a part of the disability community and part of this amazing community of advocates who are trying to elevate disability culture. And I think that once we spend time just really understanding how valuable this community is, we will then start to unlearn some of these harmful beliefs that we may have felt around having to feel like we're brave and courageous for sharing our stories, when really I think that I think we'll come to a point, and hopefully in my lifetime, where the negative value judgment and stigma and shame that may have been around disability will be much lessened than when it was when I became disabled.
Definitely. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us on the DesignRush podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. You are so inspirational. You are so powerful. It is so wonderful to sit here, talk with you, and just hear your journey. And I wish you all the best of success with everything that you have going. And we'd love to have you back on the show very soon again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Curious about what top brands look for when choosing an agency? Tune into our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the DesignRush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.